So now that we've talked about Colorado and Wyoming, today I want to talk about the state of New Mexico. And this video is going to sound very similar to the state of Wyoming. And the reason being is just like Wyoming, the state of New Mexico does not allow you to camp on state lands. And if you go listen to that Wyoming video, you'll know that if you can't camp on a lot of these lands in a state like New Mexico that's very remote, how are you going to hunt it? How are you going to fish it? How are you going to hike the trail that we call the Continental Divide Trail that goes from Mexico to Canada, comes right through the heart of New Mexico? How are you going to go hike that trail if you can't camp on it? How are you going to hunt elk in the Gila wilderness? You're not, because you can't camp there. In New Mexico, the only reason that we can hunt and recreate on state lands, even though we can't camp there, we can hunt there and we can fish there. The reason we can is New Mexico Game and Fish pays the state land board every year for the hunting and fishing rights on those state lands. And every year, or every time the contract comes up, the price keeps going up and up and up and up, to the point where it's getting very difficult for the New Mexico Game and Fish Department to be able to afford the hunting and fishing rights on those state lands. Do you think New Mexico Game and Fish could afford to lease the hunting and fishing rights on all those additional tens of millions of acres of federal land that would become state lands? No, we know that. They can barely afford what they have to pay now. And now all of a sudden, New Mexico's state lands don't just have the problem of not being able to camp on them, but they start looking a lot like Colorado, where you can't hunt them, you can't fish them, you can't hike, you can't camp, you can't anything. Because no longer can the state agency afford to lease those recreation rights from the state land board. And in effect, you have lost access to your public lands. Now that you know how it works in New Mexico, in our next video, we're going to talk about the state of Montana, my home state. It has some history and some similarities to New Mexico about having to pay for the use of these state lands.